Okay, this is a beginning tutorial for using After Effects, and I already have After Effects open. This is the main default interface. And one way that you can find out if you're on the default interface is to look at the top here where it says Workspace on the top right, and here it says Standard. There's a drop-down menu here where you might select a different way to organize the interface, but I like to keep it at Standard. You'll also, each one of these element parts on the interface is called a panel. And when you select a panel, you can see it's outlined and highlighted by a yellow color on mine. It might be different on yours. The main one on the top here, where it says layer, and there's nothing there right now, is called the composition panel. On the left is the project panel, and below is the timeline. At the top, there's a menu that's very similar to all other Adobe projects: File, Edit, Composition, Layer, Effect, Animation, View, and Window. Go ahead and scroll through each of these. Some of them aren't active yet because we don't have anything on the composition or in the timeline or in the project window yet. And then also there's a toolbar here at the top. Instead of a floating toolbar, this toolbar is attached to the panels. And you can see some of the same tools that you're familiar with: a selection tool, a hand tool which lets you move elements around, a zoom tool that lets you magnify, rotation, some tools that will be new to you, such as this one called a camera tool and a pan behind tool, and then familiar tools like the rectangle tool here, which lets you make shapes. They're not active right now because I haven't selected anything yet. So I'm going to zoom out. And we're going to go through the initial process of starting a composition. Projects inside After Effects are called compositions. So to start off a project, you always start by making a composition. A composition is like the container to hold your project, kind of like the artboard in Illustrator. So we start off by going Composition, New Composition. And you'll get a dialog box will come up, and the first thing that you're going to do is name it. I'm going to now name mine Bouncing Ball, because that's what we'll do. And then you'll see a bunch of presets and places that you can change the size, the shape, and the frame rate of your composition. For now, I suggest you just leave it on default. You can select the preset HDTV 1080 29.97. I'm scrolling through it, but not on purpose. Here it is. So that you have the width at 1920 and the height at 1080 pixels. Also notice here it says lock aspect ratio into 16:9. That's because that's become the new standard aspect ratio that most cameras are shooting in. That way, when we make an animation, you'll be able to match it in a timeline in Final Cut Pro with other kinds of footage. There's a few other places here to look at. Resolution. If you're making a very, very big project, you might reduce the resolution, at least while you're in process of working on it. And then also the starting time code, that should be at 0. And duration, just put it to 20 seconds for now. So frames, seconds, minutes. And then you can select the background color. I'm going to select white, but you can select anything, whatever you choose. And then you go, okay. So now, what you'll have is your composition window will be at the top with my white background. And you can move around these panels so that they take up different amounts of space in your array, and that can be a really helpful thing. So go ahead and experiment with that. What else we have is here, the project is still not titled at the top. So even though our composition is Bouncing Ball, the project itself still needs to be titled. So I'm going to save that and say bouncing ball project 1, and I'm going to save it. I made a folder on the desktop, and I advise you do this. And the reason why I made a folder on the desktop is because for After Effects, you need to keep all of your assets, all the images, all the sound, and all the movies all together in one folder. So that's what I've done here. Here's my After Effects folder. I have Bouncing Ball Project 1 and a couple of images I thought about using. So I'd like you to do that. Okay, so now you have a new composition. It has a color in the background, and you might notice on the left here in your project window, it shows that you have a composition. So as soon as you make a new composition, it will load that into the project window. And again, a composition doesn't necessarily have any animation in itself. It's just like a framework for your animation. So what we're going to do next is add objects and assets in order to populate our blank animation with something. And to do so, there's 2 different ways. One way is to use the browser and select images from your hard drive or from your flash drive, whatever you have on the computer, from your desktop. And to do that, you just simply double click inside the project window, which is what I've done here. And I'm going to navigate to my desktop, to my After Effects assets, and I'm going to select, I've got a butterfly, I've got a couple of butterfly images, and I have that image of Amelia Earhart. Notice that there's a few different ways to set your footage, or it's called footage when you bring it in. I keep keeping that on enable all acceptable files and importing it as footage. Okay, and now they're loaded into the project window. Here they are. And when I double click on them, they'll appear inside that composition window. I can look at them and see how they look. But that is still not our composition. So at the top here, every single thing, this will have a bunch of different tabs where you might load different things into the window. At this moment, I'd like you to make sure you go back to where it says composition, bouncing ball, whatever you named your composition. And that's what we'll use to start animating. Okay, so now you've loaded footage and footage into your composition project window. That's one way to get objects in. And if you wanted to animate one of these objects, it's, for a start, the simplest way to go is to take one of those objects. I'm going to start with my butterfly, and I'll just drag it into the window. And when you move your mouse around, and now I'd like you to look and see how the butterfly has a line of its own on the timeline. These are our seconds, and it goes up to 20. There it is. It goes all the way to 20. You can adjust how much of the timeline you see. I could adjust it so I can just see up to 10 and just work with 10. So we have our butterfly. I can use this selection tool to move the butterfly around on the stage, which is what I'm calling the stage, wherever I'd like it to begin. So I'm just going to leave it here in the corner, and I'll show you how to make the easiest kind of animation move is just to move something from point A to point B. Let's call this point A, where it is now. And I'd like you to look down on your timeline and next to where it says butterfly, there'll be a tiny little arrow. We also call it a twirly, that I can turn around, and that opens up a menu that's called that's titled Transform. And right now, because I have selected that butterfly, one of the items on that menu is highlighted, and that is called Position.